Yeah, hi. Hi, good evening, everyone. And today we are going to have a look at the XAT 2024 analysis. So I'm sure that all of you would have taken the test, and even if you are not, you're just watching it for the sake of having some fun or because you're planning to take it at a later point in time. Again, welcome to the session. So XAT 2024 happened today. So it was conducted from 2 p.m. to 5:30 p.m. And there were a lot of things that happened right even before the test started. So there were quite a few people who ended up getting centers which were far away from their home, and there was a lot of issue that happened in terms of the admit cards. You were able to download the admit cards, then you were not able to download the admit cards. Then reportedly a lot of people had their centers changed, and a lot of things happened right over the last few days. And finally that happened. So that was the good part. Now in terms of the test, if you look at it, there wasn't anything marginally sorry yeah so there wasn't anything very different from what we had expected in terms of be the pattern of the test or the kind of questions that were asked, or the kind of the topics that were there in terms of the essay or the GK section. So nothing out of the ordinary as such. So the whole challenge was to reach the test center. Once you reach the test center, it was more or less on along expected lines. So weren't a lot of surprises, so to say. To be very honest with you, I had not really prepared for this test this time. The only preparation I had done was taken the live mock solving attempt that I had done earlier. So those of you who would have seen that, that was the only bit of preparation that I had done for that 2024. Uh, but then again, I was not surprised at all during the test, right? In fact, I also had a word with quite a few people at my center after the test was done, and people more or less had the same opinion that it was not really a test that was extremely difficult, right? And that purely happens because people have a lot of time on hand when it comes to the XAT. So this year it was 175 minutes. So I know that we had been talking about 165 minutes all lost. So even in my last video, I had mentioned 165. But then again, of course, the test was 175 minutes as had been mentioned earlier. Right. So it was not an issue as such. 10 minutes more than what we had expected is still a good place to be. So it was not a problem at all. So let's have a look at what exactly happened. Of course, disclaimers at the start. These are all predictions from our side. Obviously, as we progress and as we interact with more people and try to understand it in a better manner, of course, the opinions can change. The cutoffs can go up or down depending on what the general perception is. This is purely on the basis of the students that we have spoken to, and as mentors, what we have done and compared to XAT 2023. Right, so people who had taken XAT 2023 and 2024 would have been able to comment on the level of difficulty in terms of the difference or the similarities between the 2 years. So that's what we will do. I have also kept my chat on my phone. So whatever it is that you are typing, I'll try to address more or less um, uh, uh, yeah the questions that are there. Yeah. So as we go to the section, then maybe I will try to look at some questions that are pertinent to the section that is there. So in terms of the format of the test, the structure of the test, it was fairly straightforward, similar to what was promised. So 175 minutes for the first part and 30 minutes for the second part, with a 5 minute gap in between the two parts, wherein you had to type the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, right? So you had to check whether all the keys were working or not. So that was basically the entire format. So 175 plus 5 plus 30, right? So 210 minutes in total. Now, in terms of the overall way in which the entire sections were spread out, so there were three sections. So QADI, decision making, verbal ability. Those were the three sections that were there. In terms of the split, verbal and logical ability had 26 questions. So we'll see the split a bit later as to what exactly was present in among these 26 questions. But 26 questions were there in the VLA section, verbal and logical ability section. In terms of the decision making section, there were 21 questions that were there, and there were seven sets, seven caselets, three questions per caselet. Right, so that's what it looked like in terms of the DM section. And in terms of the QA DI section, there was a lot of DI that was present today. And in terms of the QA as well, there were 28 questions. That was the largest section that is there that we had. In terms of the suggested time allocation, more or less equal amount of time for all three sections. Verbal would have taken a lot of time today, specifically because the section was on the longer side one. And the second thing is, of course, it required you to think a lot in terms of the options. Yeah, I for one, when it came to quite a few questions, I felt that the options were fairly close There was nothing separating one option from the other. And in some cases, I had to resort to pure guesswork, right? So that was basically what I did in terms of the VA section. In terms of the questions that were there, the technically correct questions, the grammatical correct or incorrect questions, or the jumbled paragraphs, those were the ones that were more or less certain. But otherwise, it was a section full of uncertainties. What I felt. Now, of course, I'm not someone who is extremely comfortable with verbal. So formally, I don't teach verbal. But obviously, I have had my share of successes when it comes to the verbal section, right? But I felt that it was slightly on the difficult side. So 55 to 60 minutes is what you would have invested there. QA/DI, because it was probably the most rewarding section, you would have invested 60 or even 70 minutes in that particular section. And decision making is what we are looking at, somewhere around 50-55 minutes of allocation. So overall, 175 minutes is what you had. 60, 60, 55 would have been on the higher end, and of course you could have invested maybe roughly 10 more minutes more on the QA/DI section. I for one, I think I invested roughly 75 minutes on the QA/DI section, and the remaining 100 minutes were more or less split equally between the VA section and the DM section. That's what I had done. In terms of the good attempts, we'll have a look at it a bit later. But in terms of the good number of good attempts in verbal and logical ability, out of 26 questions, 13 to 14 questions could have been attempted without uh, without allocating a lot of time to the section, right? So there might have been some amount of uncertainty, but the amount of time that you would have taken to answer 13, 14 questions, it was justified in terms of the amount of time available. In terms of the DM section, out of 21 questions, 11, 12 could have been attempted with high accuracy and with a lot of certainty. So that those are the number of good attempts that we have put here. In terms of QA/DI, 18 or 19 would have been a good number of attempts because a lot of these questions were manageable. I would not say they were easy, but they were manageable. That's what I thought when I took the test. In terms of the second part, general awareness, there were 25 questions that were there, 1 marks each. There was no negative marking for general awareness. If you would have just gone through the questions quickly, you would have taken maybe 5, 7, or 10 minutes to complete that entire bit of general awareness. There were some very straightforward questions. Pop culture questions were there. I was very surprised to see a few questions here and there. One question was about Matthew Perry, right? So again, they went very recent. Yeah, one question was from 1st of Jan 2024. The earthquake happened in which city or which province, right? So again, they went very recent in terms of the general awareness questions that were asked. In terms of the essay writing section, there were three options that were provided to you, and you had to write an essay on one of the three topics. So as soon as you started writing one topic, the other two would get grayed out. So even if you go to another essay and start typing that essay, it would not allow you to unless you clear your first selection, right? So that was basically how it worked. So in total, the welcome screen, the instruction screen told you that there were 103 questions, 75 from the first part, 25 from the GK section, and 3 from the essay, out of which you had to attempt one, right? So that was basically what it looked like. Yeah, people are wondering 18, 19 in quant looks to be a large number, but then again, you had a lot of time to invest, right? So 13, 14, 11, 12 questions on VA and DM, and 18, 19 on quant. You could have maybe pushed that bit more, and you could have attempted quant, of course. I can also say that roughly around, if you would have done 13, 14, 15 questions with 10% accuracy, even that would have been good enough, right? So that was more or less what we think. 18 to 19 includes all the traps that were there. And believe me, there were a lot of traps that were present in the section today. So once the official paper is out, you will see that there were a few questions wherein there was a small bit of trap that was involved. And even the DI sets that were there were some very nice things that you could have done to answer those questions. So accounting for all of that, we have put 18, 19 as the number of good attempts. Yeah, A triple B question. Yeah, very nice question. One option says A necessary and sufficient condition, right? B has to be divisible by A, 3B has to be divisible by A, 7B, 9B has to be divisible by A. So if 9B has to be necessarily divisible by A, then again, it also tells you, or B has to be necessarily divisible by A, it also tells you that 9B has to be divisible by A. So a very nice question if you look at it. But otherwise, if you look at the entire thing, that's what we explained, 100 questions plus 3 essay topics, no negative marking for GA. Some of the people were worried in terms of what will happen for the unattempted questions. So the pattern was more or less similar to what was given, as in what was mentioned earlier, and also what was there in all our SIMZATs. Beyond 8 questions, it would invite a negative marking of minus 0.1 per incorrect answer, and those marks would have been divided proportionately. So if quant was 28 out of 75, then 28 by 75 multiplied by whatever negative you would have got, that is basically what you would have got as negative additional negative marks for the quant section, right? But I'm sure that many of you would not have reached that eventuality, so don't worry about it. And even if you do, it doesn't matter at the end of it. It's perfectly okay. Marking an answer wrong is more harmful than leaving a question unattempted. So that's what we had clarified in the blunders video as well. So I think that is fine. Yeah. So this was one thing. Now, in terms of the cutoffs that are there, so in terms of the cutoffs for the XLRI BM program, we are expecting the cutoff to be somewhere around 30 to 32 marks. So I'll show you towards the end, or I'll show you rather right away as to what had happened last year, and then maybe you will be able to understand these cutoffs in a better manner, right? So in terms of the BM program, we're expecting the overall cutoff to be around somewhere around 30 to 32 marks for male candidates, because female candidates get some allowance in terms of the percentile cutoff. 28 to 30 is what we're expecting for female candidates, and that roughly corresponds to 93, 95-ish percentile. Now, to give you a benchmark as to what exactly would have happened in terms of XLRI, just give me a second. What I will do is I'll just share another screen, and I will show you what exactly would have happened. Just give me a second. I'll just share the other screen that I have. I'll just share this one. So this is basically the ultimate guide that we have. And okay, give me a second. I'll share again. Yeah. So that is basically the ultimate guide to B-School applications that we have. So last year, if you look at it, what had happened was the sectional cutoff was at 75, 85-ish percentile. Overall was at 95 percentile for male engineers. Female engineers was 92. Male non-engineers, female engineers, non-engineers, again it was 95 and 92 respectively. Right. So that was what the cutoffs looked like last year. For the HRM program, it was 2 percentile points lower. So 93, 91, 90, 88. So that was what it looked like. In terms of score versus percentile, if you look at this particular chart, then I think it will help you understand it in a better manner. So what we are seeing overall is that it was more or less along similar lines to last year's XAT. Last year, if you look at the cutoff for around 95-ish, 94-ish, 93-ish percentile, you will see that overall 36 marks corresponded to 92 percentile, 39 corresponded to 95, 42 corresponded to 97. Now, considering the inflation in terms of the number of takers taking the test, so there is going to be a percentile inflation. So let's say, for example, last year you had to be among the top 1,000 people out of 1 lakh people. This time you have to be among the top 1,000 people out of 1,40,000 people, right? So that tells you that there is going to be an inflation in terms of the cutoff. The percentiles will go slightly higher. Now, accounting for that inflation one, and considering the fact that XAT has remained more or less similar in terms of level of difficulty, that is where that figure is arrived at from, right? So when we are saying 18 or 19 attempts in the quant section with some log lapse in terms of accuracy, let's say you are getting 15 correct, 3 wrong, for example, then we're looking at a score of 14 point something. Now, 14 point something roughly corresponded to a score of 91-ish percentile last year. We expect the numbers to be more or less similar, maybe a mark towards the upward side. So I'm basically saying that quant this year was slightly easier, more manageable compared to last year's quant, right? So that is what we're saying, and that is the basis for the cutoffs that we have mentioned. Right now, going back to the presentation that I had. So you can refer to this. I'll put this in the description box or in the chat, so that you can refer to this particular page and you can figure out as to what the cutoffs look like in XAT 23, 22, and 21. So last 3 years XAT cutoffs and score versus percentile we have put there, right? So that is what it looks like. So overall, we are expecting that 95th percentile to be somewhere around 32-ish marks. That is the 31-ish, 32-ish marks. That is more or less the expectation. Okay. Now, in terms of the overview of the entire test, VLR was slightly more challenging than XAT 2023, and I felt it very particularly. The poem was slightly more complicated. Each and every RC was on the difficult side to read. Now, if you look at the questions were manageable, but the RCs per se were difficult to read. So there were no happy topics that you could have easily attempted. The topics were all slightly dense. But then again, if you looked at the questions were focusing on one particular part of that RC. So if let's say for example there was a question on barbaric and something, right? So those things that were there in that question, we had to look at only that particular part of the paragraph, right? And although there was more or less one screen that was there, you did not even have to scroll when it came to most of the RCs. So roughly each RC would have been around 200-ish words is what I would expect, 200, 250, 300 words max, not more than that. So that was what it looked like in terms of the RCs. Decision making was on par with XAT 2023. Even if we had replaced or switched both the sections, it would not have made a difference. XAT 23 and XAT 24 were almost similar in terms of what to expect from the DM section. The good thing that happened this year was that there were no questions based on ranking. So if you had to rank the outcomes from 5 to 1, let's say for example, or worst to best, then you had to rank 5 or 3 items in increasing or decreasing level of relevance. So those kind of questions were not there. And that's why DM section was slightly, I would not say easier, but it was manageable. You would not have felt tensed looking at the DM section. QA DI section was slightly easier compared to XAT 2023. And yeah, can't XAT quant easy kaise hoga? It felt easy, right? I would not rule out the possibility that the cutoffs will go up by a bit. But obviously, when we get the sheets, when we are able to figure out what exactly happened, then we'll be able to say it with more clarity. But at first glance, it felt that it was slightly easier compared to XAT 2023. Okay, now in terms of what exactly happened in the quant section, the split was fairly regular. So to say, there wasn't a lot of emphasis on arithmetic per se. There were a couple of questions that we could find from arithmetic. So one was on time, speed, distance, one was on profit and loss, right? So those kind of questions wherein increase or whatever, there is some profit that is involved, and if certain things happen, if it increases by 100, then the profitability goes up by X. Those kind of questions were there. Manageable questions. The two questions from arithmetic were fairly straightforward. They were manageable. Yeah. And Saubhagya, as you were mentioning, there was no quant decision making, right? So business decision making, there was no quantitative part involved. It was more or less subjective, so to say. There was no objective question as there, and or rather, there was no mathematical quantitative question that was there. Everything was more or less on the basis of the outcomes that could have been present, right? So it was more or less that. In terms of algebra, 3 questions were classified as easy, 2 as medium. A lot has got to do with what CAT looked like this year. So in terms of the log-based question that was there, people are asking about what happened to the log-based question. Yeah. So again, there was one answer, I think that was 2, that was possible, but then 2, if you put in the actual thing, it became 0. So those kind of things. There was one question which was extremely similar to CAT 2023 slot 3 question, right? So 2 lines coincide with each other. Therefore, what values of P or what relation between P, Q and R will those things stay? So those kind of questions were there. Yeah, so those questions were there from you can say algebra, so to say. And again, there was one on cubic polynomial. So there are 3 concentric circles with radii. What will be the sum of, what will be the ratio of their areas? Those kind of questions were there. So manageable questions, not very difficult questions. Of course, the polynomial one was slightly difficult, but otherwise the other questions that I mentioned could have been managed easily. There were no modular based questions, no higher order polynomials, no questions that required explicit knowledge of derivatives, so to say. तो वो वाले context में you are safe. Algebra के अंदर one more question was if you start 3 hours late, you reach 1 hour early. If you increase your speed by X amount, what will happen if you increase your speed by Y amount, right? So those kind of questions were there, which was manageable, right? So which were manageable. Geometry, there was one easy, one medium, one difficult question. Someone mentioned in the chat that there was an isosceles triangle with a semicircle, and outside of that isosceles triangle, there would have been another half of the semicircle that would have been there. So what is the amount that you have to pay? Those kind of questions were there. Again, manageable question. For that, I thought that you had to create an entire rhombus for it, and then you could have easily figured out the in radius, right? So that was what I had done. There was one question, I think 18, 24, 2 circles that were there, that I thought was the difficult one in terms of geometry. So again, that would have taken a lot of time. Finally, I had to resort to brute force and some trigonometry to solve it. I don't know if there is an elegant way of solving it, but I struggled with that particular question. So that is more or less the difficult bit. In terms of modern math, 2 questions were medium, 1 was difficult. And again, we did not really see questions from grouping people, similar objects into distinct groups or distinct objects into distinct groups. So those kind of questions were not there. Fairly straightforward questions on modern math, mostly from the arithmetic progression AP kind of a thing. Very straightforward questions. Sum of first 5 terms is twice the sum of the next 5 terms and so on. Sum of the first 4 terms is given, 6 term nikalna hai, those kind of questions. Manageable questions, not very difficult questions, so to say, in terms of the quantitative ability. Yeah. B equals A or B equals 0. I don't know trauma, what question you're talking about, but if someone could help in the chat, yeah, that would be good. Okay. Yeah. Then in terms of the data interpretation question, there were 13 questions across 5 sets. So that was the difficult part. The sets per se were not difficult, but there was a lot of work to be done. So out of these 5 sets, I would expect people to do 2 or 3 sets, not all 5 of them. Although there was a lot of time, but some sets required a lot of thought process, right? So if we were to look at the sets that were there, there was one set that I remember, which was 5 people and 5 different slabs of discounts or 5 different offers that were there. So at least 1 or 2 questions out of 3 were tricky in that particular set. One was a very straightforward question. There was one more set that I remember, which was, I believe it was some 2 by 2 ka split Venn diagram ka. There was a set that was there. Yeah, someone is saying Venn diagrams here. Yeah. Okay. Answer of block question. I marked it as 0. I'm not sure. So let's see. So there was a Venn diagram based question that was there. Again, a manageable question wherein you had to find the lower limit. There was only one solution, so you could have easily managed that question. There was one more question that I vaguely remember solving. Okay, 93. I don't remember the answers. So if someone is kind enough in the chat box, you can just put it there. So that will be helpful. Yeah. All right. So some of the DI sets that I remember. If others remember DI sets, you can just put it. Run rate. Yeah, run rate was a very nice set. T20. I think, I'm not sure. You had to multiply, right? For some 7.83 multiplied by something. You had to keep on doing it till the time you got an integer, and that would have given you the answer. So fairly manageable sets, not very difficult sets as such. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, someone is saying 7. I think that was right. That's what even I got. So maybe I think that should be right. And 2 sets of 2 questions each were there. Again, manageable questions, not very difficult to understand questions. You had to work hard, but the questions were not difficult as such. There was one question that was there, which was mean median mode. Yeah, so mean median mode hasn't left us. So people thought that after CAT they would not have to think about mean median mode, but it made an appearance today. Although this set was not as difficult as the one that people had seen at the CAT. So those who went with that PTSD, CATCA, they would have maybe struggled, but otherwise, I think it was a manageable. It was a manageable set, right? So at least 2 questions you could have managed. One question, jहाँ पे there was an additional condition. That was one thing that even I was not able to figure out. But though 2 questions you could have managed from that median wala, right? It was a manageable set. Okay. B equal to A. I marked B equal to A. Not sure. And cabbage, potato, onion, that was another DI set that was there. Again, manageable set. Log question answer, I have marked it as 0. But someone is saying 1 in the chat box. So I'm not sure. But I marked it as 0. Okay. Now 18 to 19 questions is after we have thought of all these things. Out of 28 questions, 18, 19 questions, given the amount of time that you had, was definitely on. And I'm sure that you will see a lot of people who would have put in these kind of attempts. In fact, many of the people that I met at my test center who were probably not very serious XAT takers, so to say, right? I heard a lot of 15s and 16s there as well. So I am pretty sure that people who were decently prepared would have easily attempted 18, 19 with certainty, right? So that was what I thought. Now, in terms of the verbal section again, as I mentioned earlier, had 26 questions. There were 2 questions on grammatically correct sentence, one on grammatically incorrect sentence. Honestly speaking, when it came to these questions, I thought many of these statements were wrong. Although you had to dig really deep and you had to have like very good basics so as to be able to crack these questions. But if you would have done Kumud ma'am's sessions, I think you would have had a good shot at these questions. Yeah. Fill in the blanks. 2 blank questions, fairly straightforward. I thought one was at least easy. Both of them are easy, but during the test, I thought that one was easy, one was slightly on the iffy side, but otherwise manageable questions. Jumbled paragraphs were straightforward. One was definitely an extremely easy question. With options, it made your life much easier. One was on the moderate-ish side. So, that again could have been managed. Critical reasoning, there were 3 questions that were there, and India World Cup final made an appearance here. So again, that was one thing which might have resonated with a lot of people. But then again, it was critical reasoning was again manageable, not extremely difficult, but manageable. Okay. In terms of summary, there was one question that was there on terms of summary conclusion kind of a thing, so manageable. There were 6 passages that were there, 3 with 3 questions each, and 2 with 3 with 2 questions each, right? And as I mentioned, 300-ish words was what the length was on an average. Again, honestly speaking, none of the passages were easy to read, except maybe the mass vaccination and herd immunity one. So that was possibly an easy one because we have come across this concept of herd immunity so many times, and I'm sure a lot of you would have a working knowledge of what herd immunity looks like, right? So that's why it was possibly the one that was an easier one that you could have managed. Otherwise, the remaining 5 bits that were there were slightly difficult. Okay? So in terms of the passage on beauty, again it was a difficult passage. Again, beauty has a lot of contextual meanings. Beauty has a lot of abstract definitions as well, right? So that the questions are also very tricky, right? So 2 questions that were there, both of them were difficult. So everybody found it difficult. In terms of the problem of unrecognized ignorance, again, it was a very interesting passage to read. The questions were also manageable. So the 3 question passages were all on the moderate-ish side, and the 2 question passages were on the difficult side, right? So that was an irony that was there, but in terms of simplified moral frames, again, manageable, easy to read, not easy to read, moderate-ish to read, not very difficult to read, I would say. उसके बाद predictive instinct and realistic storytelling. So how we have invented storytelling and how that leads to a lot of different how do I put it, different ways of reacting to situations, right? So although we might need it in our day-to-day lives, those are derived from what we read and how people tell us stories. So that was the gist of the passage. Again, as a casual read, it might have been interesting, but during the test, it was definitely a difficult set that was there. Mass vaccination, as I mentioned, was possibly the easiest of the sets or the passages that were there. And the poem was something which I thought was extremely difficult. It was a very short poem. The poem is A Missing Person by Jayanta Mahapatra. So our ACATS team has been kind enough to figure out where the poem was taken, except was taken from. So you might want to read it, but otherwise, I was really stumped when it came to the poem that was there. But again, we have started to we have been expecting it with XAT everywhere, every year rather. So not a surprise at all. In terms of the VARC section, again, we have taken it as conservative because the section was difficult and full of ambiguity. I would be very comfortable attempting 13, 14 questions with certainty. I'm sure there are a lot of people who have attempted 18, 19, 20 questions, but then you have to expect your accuracy to fall down by a bit. And of these 13, 14 questions as well, I would possibly be able to look at maybe 10 correct, 4 wrong, or 11 correct, 3 wrong kind of a scenario, right? Nothing more than that. So a double digit score in the VRC section, I think, is going to be very good. A high single digit score is going to be deceptive. Yeah. In terms of the last section that we have here, the decision making section, there were 7 caselets that were there. All of them were interesting. So everything was what you would have come to expect of from the DM section. Yeah. Poem ka answer, God knows, Pashu. No, nobody knows, and I'm sure people in the chat will also not be able to will be able to answer that thing, right? Yeah. And 770 was not an option. We had to find the sum of digits. Yes, as Deepak has rightly pointed out. So I think the answer was 14. Okay. Okay. Then in terms of the DM section, there was an HR caselet on experience credentials. Yeah. So again, an ethical dilemma question, moderate-ish, fairly. I would not say it was difficult. All the sets were moderate to read. You could have picked and chosen maybe 5 out of 7 sets to be solved, but otherwise it was more or less a similar uh, a section that was similar to what had happened, right? Then in terms of the ABC business school policies, so again, ABC is more or less a placement focused B school. Students there come only for placement; they don't really focus on academics. And then there were situations that happened, right? So again, an ethical dilemma question. There are some alumni who threaten to withdraw from the placement rounds if their wards are not given admission. Those kind of questions. So again, a fairly straightforward ethical dilemma set. I would not say the questions were straightforward, but the set was very straightforward to understand. In terms of competition between taxi drivers, so there is a taxi driver. Incidentally, his name was Prabhu. Yeah. So competition between taxi drivers, and one person is giving amazing service, but because of COVID, his business gets affected, and now he has to start again. And new taxi service, taxi or agencies have come up who are eating into the market share. So what should be done, right? So again, a very interesting set to read and to answer. Car sales again was fairly straightforward one. So there is a car dealership, there's a car dealer who is there, and someone meets with an accident. This guy comes and helps this person, suggests her to buy an SUV. Something similar to what had happened in one of the previous sets as well, right? Previous years maybe there was some guy who was very attached to his car, which I had done as a part of the XAT PYQ session, right? Not a similar set, but car dealership, वैसा ही more or less context था तो manageable. Wrongful termination of domestic help, again a very tricky set. I thought that this was possibly the most difficult one to answer because this set in itself was so straightforward, but the options were very close and you could have gone with either and you would have been able to justify your answer. So I thought that wrongful termination of domestic help was the trickiest set of all the 7 sets that were there. Then there was an HR case set on the Symbolics IT firm that was there. Uh, I believe someone was hired there, and then someone ended up getting this thing. Someone ended up getting an option to join a B school, and now this person has to leave, but there is a project that will run for 6 months, and this guy has to join the B school in 3 months. So what will that person do, right? The first one, experience credentials ke andar, I think it was between two people. One person with 5 years of work experience gets promoted over someone else who had 7 years of work experience, and this person says that only people who sort of I don't know say good things about the senior management end up getting the promotion, right? So that was again the first case that was there. But again, the sixth was also manageable. It was not a difficult case so as to say. And the last one was deep sea natural gas extraction. Again, it became very technical. There are 3 levels at which walls are present, and again there is another company that has come, and there are agencies who are forcing you to do that. So again, this was a difficult one because it became slightly technical, right? So I would say that the domestic help and the deep sea natural gas extraction, those were the ones that were on the slightly difficult side. Others were all manageable. So if you look at the number of attempts, 11 or 12 questions. So 4 or 5 sets you could have managed out of the 7 sets that we saw. And 50 to 55 minutes would have been decent enough because you had to do the same thing 7 times, right? As mentioned earlier, there were no sets on quantitative parameters, right? So again, over the last few years, we have seen those things. So there are parameters that are given, 5 parameters that are there. If the 5 parameters are cleared, only then will a person choose a particular option, right? So those kind of things were not present today. They were all decision making pure DM sets as was promised as well. Yeah. All right. In terms of the GK questions, some of the people have already asked some of the GK questions. Which of the following was not a leap year? So leap year ke andar, it has to be a multiple of 400 or it has to be a multiple of 4. I am not sure what were the options. I think one 1896, 1900 ek tha, or kuch ek tha, 2024 and all were there. So the one jahan pe the 100 wala year is not divisible by 400, that was basically the leap year, 1900 I believe. Yeah. So that was what we are looking at. All right. Yeah, 1900 Deepak. Correct. So I think that was one of the few things that I got. There were questions on authors and books. So Gulliver's Travels and I don't know which one of that. Dickens, there was something. Yeah. Yeah, 1900 I think is the right. Okay. So all those questions were there. There were capitals and cities that were there, and Kenya, Nairobi was then all the options. So I'm sure a lot of you would have been able to relate to it. As I mentioned, there was an earthquake question: which province, which city was affected by the earthquake on the 1st of Jan 2024? Yeah. And X code wala Musk ka beta hai kya? Incidentally, I have marked that as the answer. I'm not sure if that is the answer, but yeah. Nobel Prize, there was a question, Nobel Peace Prize किसको मिला था? Nobel Prize में there was another question on economics. There was one more question. Some lady was there who got a Nobel Prize for which of these? Okay, so 3 questions I remember from there. IPL final for the I think women's IPL final was between which two teams? ठीक है? चलो. All right. So no negative marking. You could have just gone ahead and marked everything as your answer. typically this does not have any consequence as such on your processes unless you go to your XLRI interview. So वहाँ पे they may or may not ask you drill you about GK, but otherwise it's a fairly manageable section. Even if you get 10, 12 answers right, you will typically be in the 90th percentile. So don't worry about it. Okay? David Copperfield, yeah, David Copperfield was Charles Dickens. Yeah, in terms of the essay, there were 3 topics that were there. So first topic was tech prediction often fails, not because of wrong models or lack of imagination, but due to lack of humility in admitting uncertainty about the future. Very loaded topic. Again, there wasn't a lot that you could have done with this topic, I believe, if you were a casual reader. So maybe I am not sure how many people have attempted topic 1. Topic 2, I think, was the one that was a crowd favorite. A lot of people would have attempted or written an essay on topic 2. Implementing more stringent restrictions on social media platforms is crucial to effectively combat the proliferation of fake news. And the third one was things which matter most must never be at the mercy of things which matter least. Again, a very abstract topic. Not sure what to make of this topic. So in the live chat, if you guys can just put which topic did you go for out of the 3 topics that were there. First, second, or third. I would like to hear from all of you. My prediction is that a lot of you would have gone for topic 2 because it's a very generic topic. As a serious aspirant, I would have gone for topic 2 because I wanted to be safe and not put myself in a lot of trouble. Yeah. Okay. What was the answer of poems? Kushnas. If I were, or if any of us were okay, if any of us were equipped to answer that question, then we would have been very happy today. But sadly, I don't think anybody is in a position to answer that question with confidence. The poem wala question. Yeah. So as I predicted, right, in the live chat, everybody is saying 2. Someone is saying Leo 1. Yeah. Third essay topic Zara. Again, good for you. But I think a lot of people would have gone with 2. Because 2 is something that you can easily write anything about. But then again, fact checkers, all your alt news and all those kind of things you could have written about. But fair enough. It doesn't matter. I did. Okay. So that was basically what we thought about the test. Now people were asking about the cutoffs and the scores. The scores I expect to be more or less along similar lines to what we had seen on the other page. I'll just show you that page again so that you know what to expect. Just let me go back to that screen. So that's what we are expecting in terms of the score versus percentage. So this is what we're looking at. Someone asked about the possible options that are there at various scores. Now, typically what happens in this context is that a lot of colleges will be cluttered around that 90 to 92 percentile, right? Typically your XIM university, IMT, IMI, IMT, IMI, maybe MICA ke liye the more you score, the better off you will be. But more or less, at least for these 3 colleges, XIM, IMT and IMI. These 3 colleges, if you look at it, roughly 91-92 percentile should be decent enough. Considering score ka inflation and everything, we would expect that number to be somewhere around this mark, right? So 35-ish, 34-ish, 30-ish, 32-ish, right? So jo bhi lower 30s is what I would expect, right? So wahan pe I will expect that 91-ish, 92-ish percentile to lie. In terms of options that are slightly lower placed than that in terms of the cutoffs, I would say something like a Great Lakes, a GIM, a TAPME, 4, Somaya. So all those options will be slightly lower than 90, 88 to 90, 87 to 90-ish type honge more or less, which I'm expecting somewhere around 30, 32-ish marks. So that is more or less what I'm expecting. Slightly difficult compared to XAT 2023. That's why I'll not go for this. But there will be some inflation in the score. So it will be interesting to see. But if you are scoring north of 30 or 35, I think you should have a decent shot. That 2022 देखेंगे तो यहाँ पे things become interesting because if everybody has perceived it to be difficult, then this is what it can happen, right? So even if you're looking at a 91-ish percentile, that will be somewhere around 26.5, 27 marks compared to year before last, and that was a particularly nasty exam. Last year wala was manageable. This year I think was very close to last year condition, I would say, compared to 2022. Right? That's why 27, 28 जहाँ पे 92 वाला था, this time it will go to somewhere around 30, 31. That's what we are expecting. Okay. So you can just check out this thing. It's basically called the Ultimate Guide to B-School Applications, and that should help you with the cutoffs. Okay. Let's look at a few questions. I'll just look at a few questions here and there, and then maybe we'll stop the session. Yeah. Essay did not get submitted even after I saved it. What happens now? Can I send an email? Agastya, if you have typed something and done the save and next bit, then it will get submitted. So you should not worry about it. If it was showing a green on your screen, then I think you should be fine. Otherwise, you can just mail them and see what happens. Worst case, see what will happen is because of your essay, they are not going to withhold your call. You can say that you are typed, but it did not get submitted or whatever once you get the interview call. So don't worry about it. Nothing can be done at this point. Okay. When could the response sheet be released? Dhananjay, maybe I think somewhere in the coming week is what I'm expecting. So considering that cat was out within 5 days, 5 days I believe, yeah, 5 days में cat आ गया था. ये भी I think will come within 1 or max 2 weeks. उसके अंदर आ जाना चाहिए ZAT का this thing response sheet. So that's what we're expecting. What will be the cutoff for Jamshedpur BM? Shreyas, as I mentioned earlier, it will be somewhere around the mid 30s, mid to late 30s is what my expectation is. 37 attempt enough for 80th percentile? Pooja, definitely yes, definitely possible. Again, it a lot depends on your accuracy. Pashu, the test takers have increased, but that doesn't mean the new test takers are good. Percentile can decrease if new test takers are not apt. Pashu, the point is you had to get 1000 rank out of 1 lakh. So 99 percentile you would have got a call. Let's say, I'm just talking about a random example. This year you have to be 1000 rank out of 1 lakh 40,000 people. Although 1000 people ही अच्छे हैं, बाकी सब घटिया है. Even then, if you look at the percentile form, it will be 99.3 percentile. So instead of 99 percentile, now you have to score 99.3 percentile. So that is what I'm accounting for. I'm not saying that more intelligent people have entered, although that will also be accounted for. So ऐसा नहीं है कि मतलब जो 40,000 extra लोग आए हैं, all of them are not good enough, right? Even if there are 500 people who are good enough, now you have to get that 1000 wala rank. The seats have remained the same. Now you have to get the same 1000 wala rank by competing with 500 more people. So that is what makes it slightly difficult, and that's where inflation comes into the which we are seeing with CAT as well. In fact, we have seen a lot of cases wherein people have scored very good marks but have not got calls from A and L at this point in time, and there are surprises to follow. So, yeah, someone saw me at the center. I was not in the best of health today, yeah. So even now I am slightly under the weather. This has got to be probably my worst ZAT. Although the response sheet will speak for it. But I found the going to be very difficult. In fact, I was not keeping very well. So verbal was completely a blur. I don't remember what I've done in verbal. Quant was what I was focused on because I like the subject. And DM also, I'm not very sure of what I have done. So I will not be surprised if this is my worst ZAT. So let's see what happens. Okay. Joydeep, I am a FABM. We'll have it discussed on a separate forum. In fact, there might be an achievers interaction wherein people from ABM and the MBA course will come and interact. So I think that will be more or less the forum to talk about it. What will be the cutoff for core Delhi? For Delhi, if I were to look at the cutoff, let's say, again, I'm talking about somewhere around 85-ish percentile, I believe. So 85 percentile will be, I think, around the 30th mark. So 28, 29-ish, agar aa raha hai, to I think you should be fine. That should be good enough for. Do B schools other than XLRI consider GK and SA? Achal, I don't think so. But again, the ZAT convener was more or less forthcoming about what happens with an essay. So everybody's essay gets evaluated. I think that the colleges will also get your essay ka evaluation as a part of your scorecard that gets delivered to the colleges. But generally, I have not seen people getting grilled on those essays. So need not worry about your essay contents if you are getting a call from a non-XLRI institute. Okay. A triple B का answer I think I wrote it as A. So B has to be divisible by ऐसे कुछ आया था. So 111B should be divisible by A. So B, if B is divisible by A, तो मेरा काम हो गया. That kind of thing. So I couldn't figure out anything else except that. So not sure. Again, some people are saying B should be equal to 0. But वो necessary condition नहीं है. Even if B is not equal to 0, even then the thing can hold true. वो था. ठीक है? Yeah. I am Lucknow SOP review. I don't think I'll be able to do that. I have to travel now. My center was also far away, like most of you guys, right? So I have to go back. I'll be traveling as soon as I finish this. ठीक है? So yeah, so I think more or less we have answered all the questions. Final takeaway from score percentile 32 for 95%. So again, as I mentioned, the best scenario is to look at last year's data. Last year's data I think will hold extremely true this year as well. So that is the number that we're looking at. Maybe 1 or 2 marks downward revision. So roughly around 36ish, 35, 36ish for 95%. That is what I would believe. Back when the actual results come out, we will know. But more or less, this is what it looks like. Okay. CAT 2024. Here I come. Science, arts, math, eco वाले का क्या था? Science, arts, math, eco. Yeah, I remember that one. Yeah, that was another question or set, I believe. I'm not sure. I don't know. I think 65 is what I wrote, but I'm not sure of that. That was a guess from myself. ठीक है चलो so I'll close the session on this note. If there's anything that you want to discuss except the questions, put it in the comment section below to this video and we'll try to get back to you. What we will do is we will have another video on the cutoffs versus scores for all the uh, uh, institutes that consider the XAT, right? So all at least the top institutes that are there 85 86 percentile tak, unka score versus percentile we will try to put over the next couple of days, and in that video or after that video you should be able to get more clarity in terms of what to expect from the test. Obviously the estimates are initial estimates and they will get revised once we get the response sheet, once you get a final percentile, so revision hota rahega. But at this point in time, if you ask me, I would say that it was extremely similar to XAT 2023. In fact, it was very similar to what XAT 101 looked like, right? So when I took XAT 101 live on the YouTube channel, I think it was more or less similar to what happened today as well. In terms of the overall perception that I had, so that was what I felt to be the case too. Okay, chalo. So on that note, I think I'll close the session. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and yeah, I'll see you again with another video. And definitely do subscribe. Do consider subscribing to the channel for more meaningful and updated content. Yeah, all right. So all the best everyone, and have a